Miss Love, if that's hot chocolate, you need to share with us. We're a little bit cold over here.
Unfortunately, it's coffee.
Even better.
All right, it is 5 p.m. and I will call this policy committee meeting to order. Ms. Dooley, may we please have a roll call?
Yes, you may. Amy Levy.
Here.
Greg Schneider.
Present.
Allison Simro.
Present.
The roll reflects that all members are present.
Thank you so much. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second on the floor to approve the agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 All right, that motion passes unanimously. Next up, is there a motion to approve the minutes from our December policy meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All right, there is a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any discussion concerning the approval of the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 All right, that motion also passes unanimously. Okay, so I just want to set expectations for the evening before we jump in. There's a lot here, even though there are one policy on the roster and 2 rules. We are not going to get through all of this tonight. I do want us to have a robust conversation. I want us to seek agreement on what remains in policy and what is potentially shifted to the handbook, if anything. And then we're going to get as far as we can, and then we're going to wrap at 6. Okay. All right. So, Attorney Love, it is so nice to have you back. Your colleague was lovely, but it is very nice to have you back.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Okay, we are going to start with policy 377. Mr. Beard, thank you so much for making yourself available. We definitely want your input as we modify this policies. It's 2 pages. Let's start with the first. I will begin by yielding the floor. Thank you, Ms. Dooley, for projecting that. I will begin by yielding the floor to my colleagues. Ms. Simru, do you have any questions, comments, concerns on that first page? Okay, you go right ahead.
Okay. Second green paragraph. We have Wisconsin Athletic Association grades 9 to 11, interscholastic activities and uses. That should be obviously a capital WI for the AA, right? As a framework. And then going down, I think it should say coaches and students participating in the interscholastic athletic program shall adhere.
Yeah, we currently have it as coaches and participants in the program shall adhere. So instead of saying students, we just list it as participants. But Mr. Beard.
Sorry.
No, go for it.
I just think coaches and students participating
Okay.
sounded rolled a little better, but it's all good.
Could you say again where you are, Ms. Simru?
I am in the second green paragraph on the second sentence, coaches. It starts with. I just thought coaches and students participating in the interscholastic athletic program and sounded a little bit, rolled a little bit better off the tongue. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry.
Okay, was there anything else on page 1?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Then we go down to the third. Since the primary purpose of interscholastic athletics is to enhance the education of participating student, the district, I think, should say prioritizes rather than places top priority on maximum student participation and the value of good sportsmanship, team play, fair competition, rather than concentration on winning, particularly in the sub-varsity level. So changing replaces top priority on to prioritizes. And then,
The rather than.
and scratch and the values of good sportsmanship, team play, and competition rather than concentration on winning. A small change there. And then I think that, I don't know why I scratched out the last part. I was just, the last part I thought sounded well with the director of athletics and activities will provide guidelines for coaches to follow, period. Said guidelines ensure maximum student participation, allowing all students the opportunity and benefits of competition. Just
Could I, no, you are perfectly fine. Can I pause you? So when I was doing my edits and my notes, I used the BV edits version because it was my understanding that that's the version that the attorney had reviewed, and those BV edits were what we should be working off of.
And when we were looking at these, we had started doing some of the edits in the other version. So we gave both versions. We had the ones that we provided last time, and you had asked for what were the ones that, because we had incorporated both the attorney's edits and our edits into one, like we have in the past, and you had asked to see just the attorney edits separate from our edits.
No, what happened last time is that there were only edits for policy 377, and the recommendation was to remove rules 1 and 2. And I said that I wanted edits to rules 1 and 2 in case we decided to keep them. So so let me back up. What does BV stand for?
Bulow Vetter, the attorneys.
Okay, so the Bulow Vetter edits are the one I was working on. I don't understand why we have two versions.
Because the ones that we typically are edits with the review from Bulow Vetter, Bulow Vetter had only recommended adding the additional state statute. These other edits are the edits that Mr. Bearden had provided for policy consideration.
Okay, is there a reason that those weren't merged with the Bulow Vetter edits?
From the conversation specifically to the rules, our recommended edits were to strike all of the rules and move them into policy, which overlaid the attorney's edits. So when I interpreted the ask that we wanted to see the attorney's edits separate from our edits, so we separated those two out.
But this isn't the rules, this is the policy 377.
I did it across the board with all of them. I interpolated that you wanted to see it across all of them, not just the rules. So.
Okay, we will move forward. Ms. Imro, did you have any other comments for policy 377? Okay, let me just pause and check in with Board Member Schneider with the first page, and then we'll move on to the second.
As reading through this one with the green edits, I looked at the same kind of things that Board Member Summerall had pointed out, with the difference in the third paragraph that I left that last sentence as it was printed in green.
And Joel, feel free to jump in because the part that's indented in green is alternative language to the paragraph above. So if we're happy with the paragraph that above as is, as opposed to what's in green, then that, but if we want to make edits to the green and then make decisions on whether or not we want to use the alternative language or the standard language, I just want to not confuse the two issues.
Right.
So.
I like the alternative language better than the original.
Okay.
I have a question with that. So if we go to the original, I just want to contrast that against what current practice is. Where it starts, the student will complete the district consequence prior to serving the extracurricular consequence. And then in the next paragraphs, it says students who participate in both athletic and non-athletic activities who violate the rules will be serving their consequences simultaneously. So let's say I play soccer and I'm also in drama. So that's going to give me an athletic and a non-athletic. And I violate a rule. So this is the district consequence might be I'm suspended for 3 days. So that has to happen prior to when I can return to my soccer or drama. But let's say if the athletic consequence is I miss 2 games. So is the current practice that I have to serve my 3-day suspension? And what if I have a game there? Since it says prior to, that doesn't count. Once I finish my 3-day suspension, then my next 2 games after that. Is that the way it currently works?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And I don't want to fix anything that's not broken, but in your experience, have you run into students where they feel like it's an excessive burden? So let's say my 3-day suspension, I had 2 games, and then once I completed that, I missed my next 2 games.
That's a great question. The way that I see that and being consistent with, let's say it's not a rule, let's say it's academic eligibility, and a student becomes ineligible but is suspended for whatever reason. Well, during that time, they can't fulfill that ineligibility part during their suspension. So that's how I look at it as the rule. If it's a violation, a code violation, you can't serve that violation unless you're in school, because you're already out of school. So serving it prior to helps be consistent in doing that, so that you have to be in school to serve your code violation athletically or non-athletically.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I just wanted to make sure we weren't putting an excessive burden on students.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. And then the simultaneously. So if I'm, again, soccer and drama at the same time, I don't have to miss 2 games and then that can happen at the same time.
Correct.
Okay.
So if I'm in drama and soccer, I serve both of those at the same time. I don't have to do the sport first, then do the non-athletic. I think that's a little excessive.
Okay, so clear the issue with school consequences, and then you can prior to, and then athletic and activity can happen at the same time after.
That is correct.
Perfect, thank you so much. All right, anything else on page 1 before we go to page 2? Okay, all right, Ms. Simara, anything on page 2?
Yeah. For the very first sentence, I think it goes for violating. I think it should say, perhaps in the event that a student violates the code of conduct, said student will be, so on and so forth. And then one more thing. The topics to the school district at the last screen, I think needs topics in the school district of the Beloit Athletic and Activity Handbook will include but not be limited to. I think there should be a B there.
Okay, was there anything else on page 2?
Nope.
Okay, I'm actually fine with not having a B, but not limited to. Mr. Schneider, how do you feel about that?
But not limited to a standard language. That's
Yeah.
fine.
Okay. Board Member Schneider, did you have any other issues that needed to be addressed on page 2?
I did not.
Okay. Attorney Love, with this section that is crossed off in red, all right, bear with me. I am attempting to balance the attorney's edits with the administration's edits that are not on the same document. On the administration's edits, they crossed out the last, the school district of Beloit shall not discriminate. Is there a reason that we need to have that included?
It's not necessary to include it here because you have you already have your non-discrimination policy that applies to all district activities, so you don't need to repeat it here.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, and what I would like to do before we approve anything is to review everything in its totality in case we kind of bounce back and forth. So if we could move on, if everyone could pull up Rule 1, and let me do the same. So Dr. Keiser, am I correct in understanding that any changes would be in the BV edits? Because that first one, it's there, everything is up for elimination. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. So when you take away our recommended edits, all you see is the attorney's edits. So
Okay.
The BV one is, has all of the attorney's recommendations in there.
All right, so I am excited to get board member feedback on this one. The way I'm approaching this is as a parent with a student who's involved in sports, I would want to know in policy the things that most immediately impact my student. And then some of the other things where it's primary information, it still may be of interest to the student family, but it's of primary interest to the coach and the staff. My thinking is that that information could be in the handbook. So let me just show you what I mean, and then I want to hear feedback. So for example, number 1, objectives of interscholastic athletics activity programs. And when it goes into coaching strategies or behaviors, I would like to see that in a handbook. If we go to the next page, I would continue with all the way down to 6. I think that is primary information for the coach, for the coaching staff, et cetera. But for like number 2, local's jurisdiction, due process, chain of command, if you find yourself in a situation where a student or a family need to appeal something, that's something that I would like to go to policy and be able to find. The next section, chain of command, where it talks about head coaches' responsibilities and assistant coaches, I would envision that being potentially in a handbook. And then for supervision of student athletes, as a parent, that's something I would want to know. Transportation, same thing. I would want to have access to that in policy. Pre-game practice, emergency procedures, release from classes. But then when we get into the budget preparation, the way equipment equipment and supplies, and then contracts, that I would say put that in the handbook for the coaches, the assistant coaches. Of course, families would still have access. And then for the last 2, 11 and 12, athletic awards and tournaments, I would like to keep that together in policy. But I'm going to start with the team. Board Member Simrau, what are you thinking as far as what should remain housed in policy and what should be placed potentially in an athletic handbook?
Just 1 second, if you would like to go to Board Member Schneider.
Yeah, please, Board Member Schneider.
As I first read through this policy, I was okay with moving the Rule 1 to the handbook. But as you pointed out, some of those pieces maybe need to remain in policy as you have identified them. The one, I would think that budget preparation and the equipment and supplies and contracts would remain within policy instead of moving those sections to the handbook.
Okay.
I mean, those are more administrative type duties for the coaches.
No, I
Preparing the
see
budget,
that point.
equipment and supplies. That would be more of a policy, I would think.
So are you thinking more of a flip-flop, the kind of administrative functioning, keep that in policy, and I would say, for lack of a better term, what may directly impact the student, the supervision, the transportation, the practice, put that in the handbook, so a flip-flop?
Correct.
Okay.
Because I think the handbook would be useful more for the participants and the families that are there, and that would be the information that they would need to be able to access easily. And if they have that handbook at the beginning of the year, they have all of that.
So let me ask you this. Where would you land on the objectives for, and Mr. Beard, I promise I'm coming to you next. Objectives for interscholastic athletics, so like the coaching strategies and behaviors. Would you say handbook for that as well?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Veer, what is your feeling on what remains in policy? What would your recommendation be?
I think in general, I think the policy should pertain to the whole department as a whole. And then when you start getting into the individual teams, that should be in a handbook. You know, so like Mr. Snyder was saying, and maybe it was him or Ms. Levy, like the equipment, the contracts and all that, I see that as being something that should not be in policy, should be in a handbook. It shouldn't be, maybe not in the parent and student handbook, but a handbook that is strictly for the coaches and that they need for whatever they need for their programs. I see that as a handbook. Parent and teacher, parent and student is something similar to what you're saying in a handbook of the objectives, what transportation, if there's what to do for chain of command, who do you contact, how does that go? All that goes in a handbook for them, and then a separate handbook for coaches. So I see this as a combination of the two, of what should be in a handbook, and then a policy as an overall governing document for the whole, for everything, as far as, but as being as, what's the word I'm looking for? It's probably not the correct word, but I would say more general and overlapping type language.
May I?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So if I'm understanding you correctly, Logistics, stay in policy. And then are you suggesting 2 handbooks, one for coaches and assistants and one for students and families? Because my next question is, do both of those things already, I'm sure the student and family exist, but this second handbook that you're referencing, is this something that's already created and we just shift this information there? Or are you proposing that that's something that the administration in your department create?
I am saying a lot of this information that we're looking at right now is already in a handbook that I do provide.
Two different ones? One is, okay, perfect. All right. Ms. Simro?
Yeah, I, just echoing, I think that the budget and contract information, and what else did we say? Should be a separate entity.
Okay, so let's do this. We'll start with number 1, and we'll just go through, for my benefit, and hopefully it'll be helpful to Ms. Dooley, to figure out where items are going to be placed, okay? If I misspeak, you jump in and correct me, Mr. Beard. All right, so number 1, my understanding, so for, and here's, Ms. Dooley, I need you to work your magic with the consistency of nomenclature, because there's a 1, and then there's the second section of 1, and then a third section of 1. So just make sure that we are consistent with policy. I trust your judgment, and I look forward to seeing it at a second reading. So that being said, so under the header of objectives and interscholastic athletics and activity program, Mr. Beard, are you saying that this already resides in a coaches and assistants handbook?
Yes, that is what I'm saying.
Perfect. All right, so that will be removed from policy. Do we have consensus on that? All right. So that will be the second set of numbers, 1 through 6. Okay. Now the number 2 that's furthest to the left, local jurisdiction, due process, and chain of command. That is a logistic that would remain in policy. Do we have consensus on that? Okay, thank you. I'm just going to circle that. And then once we figure out where everything is going, we can come back and review the sections that remain. All right. So for 3, and I'm on page 3 right now, supervision of student athletes, activity participants. And then also 4, transportation. Though that information already resides in the handbook, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so is there consensus on removing 3 and 4 from policy?
Yes.
Okay, moving on to page 4, number 5, pregame practice for athletics, 6, emergency, okay, so let's just deal with 5. We're fine with omitting 5 from current policy. Yes, no, yeah, yes, okay, thank you. And then number 6, emergency procedures in case of emergency. Would we like to keep that in policy? Because that's a procedure.
I could see that remaining in policy, but it should also be copied in both handbooks.
Yeah, and I think there may be a lot of overlap. Yep, all right. So 6 I am circling. So far, we're up to 2 sections remaining. Release from class, I say in the handbook. So that would be omitted from policy. Budget preparation, number 8, will remain in policy. Equipment and supplies. Since it, district property, how that is handled, I would lean towards keeping that in policy. What are your thoughts? Okay.
Specifically.
So that takes care of 9, which is 1 through 4, 10 contracts will remain in policy. So that's 1 through 3, which will be reassessed as far as nomenclature. 11 athletic awards will be omitted from policy and moved to the handbook. And the same for 12. All right, perfect. All right, Ms. Dooley, so we are keeping in policy, the proposed is number 2, local jurisdiction, due process, and chain of command. Number 6, emergency procedures in case of injury. Number 8, budget preparation. Number 9, equipment and supplies. And number 10, contracts.
That's what I have.
All right, perfect. We have 30 minutes remaining. We are doing great work. Let's start with number 2, local jurisdiction, due process, and chain of command.
Ms. Levy, can I ask a question?
Please, sir.
Is this considered 377 or is this Rule 1?
This is 377 Rule 1.
So this will be Rule, okay.
Yep,
Got
this is going to be, Rule 1 is going to be significantly pared down.
Gotcha.
Yep. And then if you could get us the exact names of the 2 handbooks that you have, because we'll cross-reference both of those at the end of policy. Ms. Dooley, you're nodding your head. Thank you for making note of that. So that way we should have all of our bases covered, understanding that there will be some overlap in the handbooks, and that's just fine. All right. For local jurisdiction, due process, and chain of command, so that is going to be number 2 and then 1 through 3. Ms. Simrod, do you have any questions, concerns, or edits in that section?
No.
Mr. Schneider? No. Okay. I have a quick, okay, so starting on page 3, it's my understanding we no longer have an equity coordinator. So when it says grievances shall be resolved via a hearing by a panel consisting of the equity coordinator, school principal, and assistant superintendent of instruction. So we no longer have an assistant superintendent of instruction. So let me ask you this, because we want our policy and our practice to be in line, and if they're out of line, then that's a red flag that we need to review. The last grievance hearing you had, or you participating, who heard that?
The 3 individuals that you just mentioned.
So it's been a minute.
It's been a minute.
Okay, that's a good thing. Dr. Kieser, we don't have an equity coordinator. Who would you recommend that we substitute so that if there's a grievance, we have a panel that's in line with our policy and able to hear that?
So in this case, Mr. Beard, you are not included in this panel for this purpose?
No, I am not.
So then I would,
And let me, before you answer, like I said tonight, we're not going to finish this tonight, and this might be on our to-dos. So feel free to say, I want to take a minute and think about that. In fact, if you're comfortable, can we just do that so we can be very thorough? Okay. So one of the things that I definitely want to revisit when we come back in February is who is replacing the equity coordinator. And the equity coordinator is listed all throughout the rules. So once that decision is made, we'll just make those swaps. And who is replacing the assistant superintendent of instruction. And to that point, Mr. Beard, do we have, am I correct in understanding we have an athletic director in our intermediate buildings?
We have athletic supervisors.
Okay, so thank you.
Yep.
So athletics, is that just intermediate
Just
building?
intermediate. Just
Okay.
Each school has one. Yes.
Okay. So and I'm any of those persons, and it may be an availability issue. So, and Dr. Kieser, I want to be clear, I am in no way trying to do your job, and I trust you to do that. But would it be reasonable if the equity or whoever you replace the equity coordinator with, and potentially an athletic supervisor could sit on that panel? Someone in that role, would anyone be able to step in? Is there training?
I would say probably not.
No, I appreciate that. That's helpful. Next question. Is there a reason you're not included on that panel? Is that intentional?
From my understanding, that was intentional.
Okay.
From the few that I've been a part of, I think it was because I would be, I don't know. I really don't know why, but I was told I was not part of that.
Okay.
I've been called as a witness for what I investigated in those situations.
There we have our answer. So Dr. Kieser, just keeping in mind when you're reassigning the equity coordinator and the assistant superintendent of instruction, thank you again, Mr. Beard. It sounds like the athletic supervisors would not be one of the positions to fill that, but I'm sure you're going to come back with an amazing suggestion. Then the other thing I think we just need to be mindful of is that the decision of that panel is final. So that would not come to the board. All right. And then it repeats for it. Okay, so it has 9, 10, 11, and 12. And then it basically says the same thing for 6, 7, and 8. Is there a reason that is separated? And if no, is everyone okay with consolidating that? So for example, number 1 and number 2, and it's weird because so number 1 and number 2 from the middle column, not the left or the right, because they're all numbers, are basically the same thing, just for different grades. Is there a reason that they're separated?
Could you scroll up so I can get to where you are?
So, and hopefully I can be helpful. Okay, so for number, is this?
If I can weigh in here.
Please.
Yes, I think that what is numbered 3 there was really intended to be indented, and so that you would have your 9, 10, 11, 12, and here's your grievance process, and then you'd have your 6, 7, 8, and here's your grievance process. But I think you could, unless the grievance processes are different for the high school from the middle school, I think your suggestion that you consolidate those and recognize the first sentence recognizing who's responsible, being the high school principal or the middle principal, and defining that, but then setting out the grievance process for both of them if it's the same. Now, if it's different because your panel's going to be different based on whether it's middle school or high school, then I think you have the grievance process under the, and again, it's hard. So 1, 1 would remain 1, 1, but then you'd have 2, 1. 3 would be 1, equivalent to what it is for the high school. My other comment is that grievance is not defined, and the question, I think, needs to be addressed as to what grievances do they bring under this policy? Because we have numerous policies that address things like harassment, discrimination, bullying, and those policies would take precedent even if those activities occur during extracurriculars or athletics.
Thank you so much, Attorney Love. And my assumption is that it's probably appealing a suspension, but I don't want to go with that assumption. Mr. Beard, could you clear that up for us about what grievance means in this context?
It is exactly what you just said. It's
Okay, appealing a
violation
suspension.
of the athletic code.
So does it need to be more broad than that, or could we say appealing a suspension or appeal of a suspension or appeal or modification of a suspension shall be resolved via?
I think grievance is too broad because some people view grievance as whatever that may be. I might not like the coach. I might not like how they're doing this. I might not like, that's my grievance. So I'm going to go through this process. I think it should be more specific to a code violation, an athletic code violation, since we're talking about athletics, and you can file a grievance against that as opposed to anything else that comes with athletics.
Okay. Dr. Kieser, do you want to think about that a little bit and then decide who's going to be on the panel to address it and then propose language for?
That discussion clears things up quite a bit, because really, if I would change grievance to code appeals
Okay.
shall be resolved, and then in part, I understand why you, Mr. Beard, would not be involved, because they're appealing a decision that you handed out. So I guess the question that could be is, do we want to have three set people, or do we want to have a panel of three? And then, because in policy is designed not to be easily changed. So putting language in that provides consistency across changing dynamics, if this will not be in a handbook, is something that's top of mind for me. So if we are saying something to the effect of, code appeals shall be resolved via a hearing by a panel of 3 administrators, one of whom shall be a building administrator, allows for flexibility of changing titles and availability of individuals. So it doesn't have to be 3 positions, some of whom don't exist, some of whom have different titles now. But if we say, I think it was very intentional that they had 2 district level administrators and 1 building level administrator. I think that might clear up and simplify the process altogether.
I like that, but it does need to be someone who's familiar with this policy. So I don't know if that's a formal training for anyone that could stand in to be on this panel, but you can handle that in administration regs, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then my other question is, the first number 1, it says student athletes and activity participants. And then if you go for the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, and then the second one that addresses 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, it just says student athletes. Is that an oversight, or is that intentional?
Are you asking me?
I'm asking anyone who knows.
Well, I'm out of that conversation because I don't know.
Okay, yeah, perfect. All right. I'm assuming, but I want to confirm that we want it to include student athletes and activities, because we do have activities at the 6th, 7th, or 8th grade level. Does that seem reasonable?
Yes.
So I would like, in the proposed language, to merge those and just make sure that we have athletics and activities included, and I love code appeals. I think that's narrow enough, but it still works. All right, I think that clears that section. The next one that is remaining in policy is on page 4 of 6, which is emergency procedures in case of injury. Ms. Simru, anything for that section?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Mr. Schneider?
Again, just the one in number 4 that's highlighted, recommended, required.
Yep.
Which one is it?
So is the first aid course, what is our practice? Is it recommended? Is it required? Mr. Beard, do you believe it should be required? So it says, it is obvious from the foregoing that a certified first aid course is strongly blank, or a course in athletic training for all coaches, advisors. So I'm assuming, please confirm, athletic training coaches or athletic training courses, do they include first aid?
All of our coaches per WIA have to be first aid certified.
Okay, then that clears that up. We'll have our required. And then my only question happens under the header of number 1. It says towards the top, student athlete / participant shall be evaluated for his or her ability to be discharged to his or her own care. Shouldn't that be the care of a parent or guardian? Unless they're 18. Unless there's something I'm missing. So the 4 lines down. So number 1 that started with coaches / advisors shall make every reasonable. If you go down to the 4th line, it says student athlete / participant shall be evaluated for his or her ability to be discharged to his or her own care. If a child has had an injury, it seems a little ridiculous to me that they're going to be discharged to their own care. Shouldn't that be to the care of a parent or guardian?
I'll let Mr. Beard answer from his perspective, but from my personal experience, there are several cases in which participants are injured and released to their own care.
A child under the age of 18?
Yeah. My son primarily, he rolled his ankle and he was discharged to his own care so he could come home.
Okay. Yeah, Ms. Simmer?
Yeah, I agree. I think that because of the following sentence where the parent or guardian is notified of said injury, I think a lot of injuries occur that might not be significant. I think that it might need to be included that if it is a significant injury, then the parent or guardian would be released too. Because if you get an elbow to the, side and you need an ice pack, but you don't, necessarily need your parent to come, I think that there's a little bit of a difference there.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a level of injury, but
Right.
Mr. Beard, what's the practice?
Yeah.
Well, the practice is that an injury is something that what you're referring to, Ms. Simro, is being hurt. An injury is, I might have to call 911. There's a shoulder came out of dislocated. That's an injury where a student definitely cannot continue to participate. Might be concussion's another one. That's an injury. So that I do agree for an injury, a parent should be notified, and there should be follow-up, which is what we do now. So in the case of if we can't can contact a parent, which we usually do right away, then that coach will go with that student if they have to be transported to the hospital or if they have to do this. So I think it should be in there as policy that it has to be, we have to contact a parent or guardian if it's an injury. I think that's the key word.
So can you massage that language on release to or discharge to own care? And then at the beginning of that, can we define what an injury is so it's clear to people that an injury is, however you wordsmith it, but this is beyond a bump or bruise.
And as you're describing that, I'm right with you.
Can we also,
Yep. No.
can we
right
also
with you,
maybe
Kat.
add the language that, like he said, there's a difference between being hurt and being injured, that they're discharged to their self if they are hurt, rather than, so there is still room for that, for them to go.
But with the, okay, so I'm not against that, but since the header is emergency procedures, like if you caught an elbow, I don't see that as an emergency. So if we just clear up what an injury is, I don't think we need to spend too much time on what it isn't. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, because I think if we separate out what injury versus hurt would be, from your definition, my son was hurt. He wasn't injured.
Correct. And emergency, I think, is the key word as well. Emergency, calling 911 or whatever. I think those are, I can just give you an example that just happened this past winter. We had a basketball open gym at the high school for high school kids. The kid, one of our students, was going up for a layup and dislocated his knee, and it was obviously he was injured, So we had to call 911. We called a parent guardian right away. They were there before 911 or the ambulance got there. We made sure coaches did a great job. Kids were helping too. So to me, that is definitely emergency, injury, needs to be follow-up, needs to be this, that. I think that's what this is pertaining to.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Attorney Love?
Yes. So this whole section, I think, I mean, you're going to rework it. I would point out that number 3 under this section says, in non-emergency situations, the student athlete participant shall be safely delivered to his or her parent, guardian, or the hospital. So that seems contradictory to the notion that this is an emergency procedure, and we're saying in non-emergency situations, you know, where someone's hurt, you're not releasing to the parent, but it appears that under number 3, you are releasing to the parent. So maybe, so just as this is reworked, let's think about that. And then the other piece of this is that we're once again talking about coaches and advisors. So this section, we're all thinking in terms of athletes, but you have someone who's in a theater production and they fall or something and they're hurt. This procedure would apply to them as well. So we need to keep that in mind. And I think of that in terms of this notion of certified first aid. Are all advisors required to be certified first aid, even for non-athletic? Because if that's going to be a requirement, I mean, that's fine, and maybe they should be, but if they're not, you need to keep that in mind going forward in terms of how you're going to handle that.
Attorney Love, this is specifically why I missed you. Absolutely. All right. So Dr. Kieser, what I have from my notes of what we want to revisit in February, we definitely want to look at 3, and maybe that needs to be omitted. We want to clear up what an emergency is, and then look at the discharge to his own care and see if those still match. It sounds like they might not. And then we have to keep in mind, this is, thank you again, Attorney Love, athletics and activities. So, yeah, and it says coaches / advisors. Is that the current practice that advisors are trained in first aid as well?
That is not the current practice. I know coaches are required to be certified first aid.
Yep.
Advisors are not necessarily required.
Well, they are according to policy.
Correct. I see.
So, all right, I appreciate your transparency, and I know Dr. Kieser is going to work with your team and make sure that we're being compliant with policy.
I do have one question though.
Please.
With this. We're talking primarily of student athletes. Would a coach fall underneath that, or the advisor fall underneath that emergency?
Yep, so the header of emergency procedures in case of injury, that very last one, number 4, where it talks about first aid, it's required, it's not recommended, we got that edit. Athletic training for all coaches / advisors.
No, I mean if a coach was injured.
If a coach was injured?
Yes. We've had that a few times at the high school.
Okay, finish that thought. If a coach is injured, what?
I'm asking will this rule cover a coach as well? It does not cover a coach. Okay, because I asked because we've had to do that for coaches in the past as far as the emergency action of them being injured while in the building.
Is there something separate, like for employees, that's like employee comp, what needs to happen for an employee that's injured at work?
Correct. We would treat them under the employee policies
Okay.
and not under the students.
Okay, I was just asking. It popped in my head.
No, that is part of the beauty of these conversations. All right, we've got 6 more
And
minutes. Yes,
If I
Attorney
could
Love.
suggest, then you might want to cross-reference at the end of the policy, list the cross-reference of the workers' comp policy or injury reporting policy as it relates to coaches and advisors.
Would
Just
we
so that
need,
if that ever comes up in the future, you know, they grab this, they know to go to the other policy.
Would we need some explanation on how obvious do our cross references need to be? Because if I'm looking at a policy for students, I wouldn't necessarily think that that would also include a policy for staff, even if they found themselves in the same position. Is that standard practice?
I'm not sure, but I think since it came up as a question, does this apply? I think that if you do a cross-reference and you could put the heading of the policy, but you could put like dash employee injury.
Okay.
So that they would know there's someplace else to look. This one doesn't apply to them.
I like that final thing you said about being specific about what portion of the policy, like the portion of the policy that's referenced explains why it's cross-listed with this policy. How do other board members feel about that?
I like the idea of adding that, and that could be added as, say, number 5, and just stating that employees or coaches that are injured would follow a different policy, and just include it right here, so that you reference that other policy.
I would push back on that slightly just because our standard operating procedures for posting, people know to look for that at the end. Yeah, because I don't want it to be missed if people go to the end looking for it and don't catch it. All right, really good work. Let's see if we can do one more. All right, here we go. So the next section that's going to remain is budget preparation. Ms. Simra, do you have, just for that section, 8, 1, 2, and 3, any questions, comments, or edits?
Yeah, I'd just like to edit insure to ensure. I think that's error in number 1, towards the end.
Okay. Mr. Schneider, do you have any questions, edits, concerns with that section?
I have no additional concerns.
Okay. My only question is, athletic/activity budgets are prepared prior to the effective date. That seems very broad to me. Is it a day before the effective date? Because somewhere in there, that budget has to be approved. So for me, I think it's prudent to put a window in there. We don't want to make it too specific that people keep missing it, but just prior to the effective date. I know how our overall budget works with the work that we do concluding in October, but for the departmental budgets, Dr. Kieser, and you can hold off until February to address this, but I would like to know what that process looks like for departmental approval of expenditures, because then I think we can give people more clear direction of when the budget needs to be prepared for athletics and activities.
And actually, I'll have to defer to Mr. Beard in terms of how he has his coaches establish their budget, because he oversees all of those.
As far as establishing a budget, we use our previous budget and what we look at, and we compare it to what we've done that current year to project what we do for the next year. So our coaches don't set the budget. I set the budget according to that information and the other factors that go into it, as far as uniform rotation, equipment needed, any factors like that. And I get that information from the coaches when we have our end of season meetings, and I use that to build the budget for the next year.
So this might be much shorter by simply eliminating a lot of this to say that the Director of Athletics and Activities sets the budget for all sports.
So there's just one budget. There's not smaller budgets for each. Okay. All right. Mr. Beard, thank you so much. Your participation has been very valuable. Are you able to come back the first Wednesday in February without looking at a calendar? Forgive me. I believe that's February 1st, and join us again so we can hopefully wrap this up.
Yes, as long as it's Wednesday, I'm all good.
It is Wednesday, and
Yeah.
it'll be 5:30 instead of 5. Oh, and it's
Do it.
February 2nd.
We can do it. That's
Okay.
Groundhog's Day. We can do
Before
it.
we, just one quick
Yes, absolutely.
Because the budget preparations not only refers to athletics, but also activities, I still think we need some kind of idea of what those budgets and when they're due are.
Yes.
Okay.
Dr. Kieser, will you be prepared for the February 2nd meeting to speak to activities, or Mr. Beard, is it the same process for activities?
Activities don't necessarily have a budget.
So like drama with like props and costumes?
Yeah, I don't necessarily get involved with that budget. Our principal works with them on that budget.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you pull that information for us, Dr. Kieser, just to
Yep.
make sure that we're not creating a space where people will be non-compliant with policy?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, everyone, so much. Attorney Love, good to have you back. Hopefully, you will be able to join us on February 2nd. We did great work. I think we were super productive. I'm excited for February to get this wrapped up and hopefully sent to the full board for a first reading. Unless there is anything else, our next meeting date will be Wednesday, February 2nd. We will be back at 5:30. Anything else before adjournment? If no, I will be happy to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, there's a motion, second on the floor to adjourn. Is there any discussion? All right, hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody.
Bye, good night.